Welcome to the Gen Z show. I am your host, James McLamb. This week's a little bit different. We normally do a little intro before we bring in our guest, but this is different into the sense that we have a return guest. And I really wanted to bring in my friend Chris Martin, who is releasing a new book, The Wolf in Their Pockets, about social media. I really wanted to bring him back because our audience knows how I feel about social media. We did an extended series last year on the podcast about social media. And so when I found out he was releasing this book, I wanted to be one of the first people to be able to uh, interview him and share this information. So I'm really excited to bring back to the stage our good friend and author, Chris Martin. Chris, how are you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I know you're excited. You've got a book coming out. Tell us about, well, first off, our audience some of them may be new. Just give them a brief introduction of who you are and your background.
Sure. So my name's Chris Martin. I spent 7 years of my career working at Lifeway Christian Resources, running social media and a handful of other online content projects there. The last 3 or so years, I've been at Moody Publishers, based out of Chicago. And there I help edit some of our books for theology and things like that. And then also run a website called Bible to Life, which is kind of our attempt to extend our work as a publisher, not away from books, but beyond books, to helping people who are searching for biblical, trustworthy resources on the internet, particularly going after folks who are searching in Google and maybe coming across less than trustworthy answers to their questions. We, in my day-to-day job, like what I spend most of my time doing is creating online resources to help people who are looking for answers to faith questions and pulling that content from our books and just helping pair them up with trustworthy answers rather than some of the more dubious ones they'll be able to find elsewhere. So that's what I do, like, for a day job. I'm also a writer. I've been writing on the internet, for far too long, since I was in middle school, and was blogging all through middle school, high school, college. Started writing more professionally once I graduated from college, and started a newsletter about social media and our relationship with it in like late 2019, early 2020. And that's called Terms of Service. You can find it at TermsOfService.social. And I write there twice a week. Been doing that for a number of years now. And there was one book born out of that just about a year ago. And that's when we first talked, just about a year ago, called Terms of Service, really based out of the heart of the newsletter. The way I describe Terms of Service, the book, is it's meant to be like a mirror book. It's meant to ask the reader to reflect on their own relationship with social media and say, hey, what's my relationship with social media? And how is that affecting my heart, my mind, my soul? And then that, as soon as I was done writing that, before it even came out, I was like, man, I think I have another book in me on this. And I think it should probably be more for leaders specifically. And because I had heard from a number of leaders throughout the writing process on the first one, and then certainly once Terms of Service released a year ago, some of the most frequent feedback I was getting was from leaders who wanted a sort of leader-specific resource for leading in a social media age. And so I said, you know what, you're right. Started writing that one pretty quickly after that. And it's funny. I was just telling you, I think before we started recording, that this book has been finished for like a long time for me. So the fact that it's like just now releasing, it's been something I've been working on for almost a year and a half, 2 years. And so this is called The Wolf in Their Pockets, and it's where Terms of Service is more of like a mirror book. This one is meant to be more, if you want to continue the metaphor or the image, like a magnifying glass. Like, this book is more, what is the relationship that the people I lead have with social media, and how do I best lead them as they have a relationship with social media? And so this one is less reflective, less personal, more really, like, the way I've described it is like, this isn't even really a social media book. This is a leadership and discipleship book that manages to be about social media. So this is as much about leading people, discipling people. This could be for a pastor or a parent or a lay church leader, frankly, even like a Christian business leader. And it's kind of like, hey, the people I lead, the people I care about, the people I disciple are clearly being shaped by social media more than anything else. How do I lead them with that in mind? And so this book is a much more practical tool on how to lead well when social media seems to be leading your people more than you are.
Why do you think this book is needed now? Why is this something that we should rush to Amazon and pull in? Why is this needed now?
Frankly, this book was needed like 10 years ago, and I don't know why it hasn't been written. This book is needed now because, I mean, I think I spoke to like 2 or 3 dozen pastors and lay church leaders as I was writing this. And when I was talking to them, it was clear to me, and it's become even more clear since I finished writing, that the biggest kind of unknown, the biggest area of pastoral work that feels like a void to them, that feels like something they can't quite grasp, they can't quite
Mm,
lead effectively through, is their congregants' relationship with social media. And like I said, this isn't just a book for pastors. I think it applies to parents and stuff too. But
yeah,
what I've
and for our
recognized,
audience, people who are actually working with youth as well. Yeah,
exactly. Oh my gosh, student ministry leaders are probably the loudest voices I've heard on this subject.
yeah,
Um, and so what I've gathered is, along with maybe a couple other topics today, leaders' biggest hindrance to leading effectively in their mind is that they don't know how to influence the people they lead more than social media is influencing the people they lead. And so
mm,
they try to say, hey, do this, don't do this. Here's how you can, follow Jesus more closely. Here's how you can further yourself in your career more effectively, or whatever you think. And however they're trying to lead, they feel like they're having to shout over top of how social media is influencing the people that they're trying to lead. And so what this is meant to do, this book, is kind of meant to equip leaders to not feel like they have to shout over social media, but how to kind of loosen the grip that social media has on the people that they care about, and allow them to lead and disciple more effectively. And so that's why I think this book is needed, is because one of the biggest pain points I've heard from leaders in the last 5 or 6 years is, my people are being shaped more by Facebook than by me. What do I do about that?
right. And for youth, and for the standpoint of who we are generating, they're being shaped more by TikTok and to
Sure.
really snap than they are any other aspect of it going forward with it. In one of your newsletters recently, it really evolved me, where you were quoting someone who was talking about the rise in mental health problems correlating with Instagram being bought by Facebook around 2012.
Mm-hmm.
That we're now seeing that there really is not just a correlation between when youth mental health has started on the increase and the rise of social media, but we're beginning to say that there is a definite cause and effect relationship going on here. I'm just
Yeah.
going to throw that out there and see where you go on that, because I have had arguments, very, very polite arguments, but arguments nevertheless with people that say, no, there's no really cause and effect with youth that have going this. And I'm like, guys, we've got to face facts that there is something here and we need to be apparent.
Yeah, Jonathan Haidt is a social psychologist at New York University, and he's one of the most well-respected and well-known social psychologists in the world, certainly in the country. And he has been very concerned with the precipitous decline in the mental health of teenage girls in the West in
Mhm.
general, and in America specifically, for 5 or 6 years now. He's been keeping tabs on this research, because study after study continues to show that there's a massive mental health epidemic among teenage girls in the global West, and in the United States in particular. And he has long theorized that social media is the primary cause of that, but he hasn't been able to, I'm not a researcher or a psychologist, so I don't know enough about what the preponderant, what level of evidence you need to go from there's a correlation to a causation. I don't know what that
Right.
threshold is, but someone like Jonathan Haidt knows what that threshold is. And Jonathan Haidt has concluded, since the CDC just released their biannual youth risk behavior survey, that showed that most teen girls, 57% of teen girls, now say that they experience persistent sadness or hopelessness, which is up from 36% in 2011. And 30% of teen girls now say they have seriously considered suicide, which is up from 19% in 2011. Mental health among teen girls is in a horrible position. And there's further data and studies that Jonathan Haidt cites in this article he wrote at the end of February, when he says we can now draw a causative relationship between social media use and teenage girls' mental health. And so I'm grateful. I mean, it's sad, but I'm grateful that someone like him is willing to put his, and surely people will disagree with him, and that always happens in these things, and that's fine. But I'm really grateful that someone like him is willing to put his reputation on the line effectively and say, okay, we can now draw a causative relationship here rather than just a correlative one, because I think that will go a long way toward maybe waking some parents up to this, because there's some social media platforms are on the hook for a lot of this because they're not protecting teenagers as much as they should be, but parents are on the hook too.
And the bottom line, they're just looking to make $1. I mean, we don't need to think that they're there to expand people's connectivity between each other. That might have been their original intent, but it is far gone beyond that as we get into stakeholder.
And if you talk to many parents of teenagers, they will tell you that they feel like they're more often at war with these platforms over their teenagers' mental health than partnered with these platforms when it comes to their teenagers' mental health. And you're exactly right. Like these platforms are responsible to some degree, but parents are too. And my hope is that this data will help maybe wake some parents up, if it gets enough publicity and things, wake some parents up to, hey, maybe it wasn't smart to let my 14-year-old daughter hop on Instagram right away. What can I do about that? How can I, maybe I can't unring that bell, but is there something I can do to help mitigate some of the negative effects that may come as a result of that? And at the same time, maybe this will help put some pressure, some governmental pressure, some other social pressure on these platforms to start taking real legitimate action beyond the sort of surface level things they've done to start helping teenagers, particularly teenage girls, protect their mental health as they engage on these platforms.
And I wish it was just young girls getting on at age 14. But from my own experience and on the interaction, 14 is that's perforated by 14. We're talking 10, 11. I have a girl who's going to turn 13. Well, about the same time your book is released. She's going to be turning 13 and stuff. And her friends, now she's in the 7th grade, her friends, many of them have had it for 2 years. And I'm like, listen, what are you parents doing to this? Oh, they're going to use it anyway. But in this backdrop of that, we know that mental health is rising. We can see now that there is a cause and effect relationship on this. How can we, as those who are working with youth, lead them better? How can we use, within their pockets as a tool to equip us with the knowledge we need to be able to help youth? Because I'm just so concerned about this. And I don't see. You mentioned government intervention. I don't see government really doing anything until there is an event that gains such national press that they are forced to. And I don't want it to be that, because that kind of event is going to be something tragic and someone's going to be suffering. But that's what moves government to do stuff like this.
Yeah. It's really hard. This is a hard question to answer because I don't know, like every parent and every family is so different, that generally, like, what could parents do? I would say seriously count the cost of letting your teenager get on these platforms. I mean, first of all, most of them don't even, basically you have to lie to get on the platform if you're under 13. So even if the platforms themselves are saying don't get on this until you're 13, that should communicate something to parents. But like, frankly, the first thing that has to happen is parents have to care, man. A book like mine is going to be useless to a parent if they just don't care. And so I don't know. I genuinely don't know if many parents count the cost of their kid being on social media. And you know why? Honestly, my totally honest opinion is that the parents are probably so addicted to social media that they don't see the negative side effects for their kids because they're not even seeing the negative side effects for themselves.
And it's almost like one of those things where they really can't say to a kid, don't do this. This is bad for you. do as I say, not as I do type of thing, which
Yep.
has always, that's a parenting thing that's always been there. Before it was smoking and
Yeah.
alcohol. And now we've moved
Yeah.
into something that's even more subtly addictive and
Yep.
maybe long term even more harmful. We'll have to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, and it's it's really hard to tell your kid to put their phone down at the table if you're scrolling Facebook the whole time you're eating dinner. And
Mhm.
so yeah, I think
Exactly.
parents are afraid. I think parents are afraid to give up their relationship with social media and look like hypocrites, and so they just don't say a whole lot to their kids. I really do think that that's a huge factor, and so I think that if parents really care about their kids, they will reconsider and consider seriously the relationship that they let their kids have with social media. Now, again, that may not be a zero relationship with social media. I'm not here to say that you should never allow your kid on social media, because I've said this many times, because this is one of you can imagine, as like I work in student ministry at my local church. I speak to parent groups pretty frequently. The most common question I get is, when should I let my kid be on social media? And you may think, based on the fact that I'm writing this book about how social media is a wolf in people's pockets, that I would say never, never let your kid on social media. And like, I think that's a fine decision. Um, but really, I think as a parent, you're just choosing which set of problems you want to have. It's not like either route is without its issues. Because if you let your kid on social media, the problems there are obvious to a lot of us.
Yeah.
They may engage in consuming content they shouldn't be, posting and sharing content they shouldn't be, all kinds of negative side effects. They could be preyed upon by an adult somewhere else they don't
Yeah.
know, all kinds of negative effects that come with letting a kid on social media. And a lot of parents recognize that and say, you're never going to be on that. However, there is a cost to not letting your kid be on social media. The level of social ostracization and bullying that truly happens among teenagers who are not allowed to be on Snapchat or Instagram, and therefore not be a part of a lot of like group chat and kind of like, imagine lunch table like discussions that are taking place on these platforms, in the out of school hours and during school, but especially in the evenings and on the weekends. Then they're left out. They're socially ostracized. And I've heard many stories of kids getting bullied for not having various social media platforms. Now,
Wow.
as a parent, you may be tempted to say, "Well, that's ridiculous. Just get new friends." Like, okay, you go back, mom, and try to make new friends at school again. It's just like, it's not that easy. I can't just like drop my friends and go find new ones who don't use social media, because most teenagers do.
Yeah,
And
see,
so
that's
I
the
think
thing. If we treat it like the addictive stuff like alcohol and drugs, it was easy back in my day for a parent to say, don't hang out with those people. But,
right,
but you could find segments in your school setting, in the school culture, that were not engaging. There, where are those segments now? I mean,
right,
you
right.
may have had 40% of the school that were doing the rough, mad stuff. I'm making that number up. That is not a factual
Sure.
statement, people. But now there's not that. It's such a great level. So yeah,
Yeah.
that is
Yeah.
a
And
great
and,
point.
and so like, it's like, do you want to be having a hard conversation about why you have to take Instagram away from your kid? Or do you want to be having a hard conversation about bullying and being made fun of with your kid because they don't have Instagram? One of those two things is going to happen. So all of that's to say is, that's like, a lot of people, I'll say, well, there's not an easy answer when they ask me, and they're like, oh, you're punting, like, just answer the question. I'm like, no, really, like, I really think there is. It's similar to like the school choice question. For a lot of people have very strong opinions about homeschool,
Mhm.
private school, public school. Every choice comes with its own set of problems. It's just a matter of which set of problems do you want to deal with. Do you want to deal with things that people are doing and learning at public school, or do you want to deal with having to get your kid in more social settings because at home they aren't? It's a similar kind of conversation with social media. You're just having to choose as a parent: do I want to counsel a kid who's being bullied, or have to counsel a kid who's coming across content maybe they shouldn't be? And so I just think, as a parent, the biggest thing that I would say, I'm not a parent of a teenager myself, but I've been working with students for over a decade, so I'm very familiar with what this culture and this atmosphere is like. Um, my biggest plea for parents is to just be thoughtful, like, be intentional. Whatever decision you make, think about it, and be ready. My dad works in data security, and has for basically my whole life, helping companies protect their customer data, health, data, all of that. And he often says that his conversations with these companies is less about preventing something, a data breach from happening, and more about how to respond when a data breach does happen, because hackers often outpace the defense against the hackers.
Yeah.
The similar situation here, where I just always encourage parents, prepare as much for responding to a crisis related to social media with your kids rather than trying to prevent it altogether, because a crisis is surely going to come, whether it's something as lighthearted, if you want to call it that, as some bullying that takes place, or they get into some serious content or whatever that they shouldn't. There's likely going to be a hard conversation you're going to have, and if you're going to hand the keys over to social media, just go ahead and prepare for those hard conversations as soon as you hand the keys over.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag as far as social media goes. It's hard going to be put it back in unless we have some kind of government body that clamps down on some level. But parents are going to have to learn how to manage it. And I get those same questions that you get, Chris. Hey, when should I let them have it? Or even a better question that I've had, and this one's a hard one, is so I want to introduce it to them slowly. Which social media platform should they start with? And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like, it's like been asking in the, when I was growing up, okay, which flavor of cigarette do I let my kids start
Right.
with? Or do I let them chew tobacco before, or dip before they do this? And I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. I have my own personal opinion on how I rank them, but do you get that question?
I don't, gosh, and I'm glad I don't, because I'm sitting here racking my brain as to how I would answer that, and I don't even know how I would answer that question, because each one is racked with its own problems. I suppose I would maybe go for Instagram first, but I don't even feel super great about that. Yeah, man, I don't know. I can't say how I would answer that.
When you think about Instagram, people say, "Oh, it's just Instagram." In some ways, is less censored than TikTok is.
Sure.
There are things that Instagram will allow on their reels that TikTok, and people will get pushed back on that when I say that. And I'm like, no, really, go to it and watch. There are things that TikTok obviously has that addictive quality, that motion, that video, that engaging. But it's I've been asked that before, and I was like, my response is that I would start with whatever one you are the most comfortable being on yourself, that you can be with them. I said, I can't tell you which app. I said, but if you're very, very familiar with Instagram and you're engaging on there all the time, then maybe that's where you start. If you're a TikTok freak and you're there a lot, then you start.
I think that's
stay away from talking about Snapchat, but
I think that's as sound advice as you can give, and and it's just hard because they're going to want to be on all of them, and it's a lose equation for that question. But you would have to start somewhere, and I think your cigarette analogy is about as apt as any. And so I do think that wherever the parents most comfortable with themselves is probably the best place to start. But that's a tough one.
Where do you see us? This question just came to mind. I had not prepared to this, but where do you see us going with social media in the next few years? I mean, how do you think this is going to play out? Soothsayer here.
Yeah, I hate to be and sound negative, but I think it's only going to get worse. Meaning, like, I think the mental health problems are only going to get worse. I think we are going to head into a sort of tragic situation, like you've kind of said, as far as mental health is concerned. I think that the government will be compelled to act in some way once they get their head out of the sand, and every time they have these leaders before them asking, why are you censoring XYZ? Maybe they'll start asking real questions, about the mental health of teenagers and stuff.
Right.
And so, I think it's only going to get worse for a while. However, I am optimistic, and I've said this for a bit. I am optimistic for this reason. I think it's gonna get worse, and then start maybe getting marginally better in maybe a decade. And here's why. kids who are teenagers today, and especially those who are like in college now. So, like those who are maybe and just at like 20 to 24, kind of call it the Instagram generation, the people who their first social media platform was Instagram. So those who are in college, maybe just out of college and like later in high school, they're among the last who have parents who never had social media as teenagers. So like I have friends. Let me make this like less theoretical, more practical, and make it easier to understand. So like I serve in the student ministry at my church, and we have 6th through 12th graders. And for virtually all of them, especially the older ones, their parents did not use social media as teenagers because it didn't exist. They like Facebook came out when they were in college or even a little bit older. And so most of the parents of the teenagers that I talk to don't know what it's like to be 14 with social media because they never had to experience it before. And so they're parenting as best as they can, but parenting from a position of ignorance in a way, in that they can't empathize with what it's like to be on social media as a 14, 15, 16-year-old. They simply don't know that pressure. It is unknown to them. They may know similar pressures, but they don't know that pressure, or the experiences that come with that. Like feeling like you're constantly under social stage lights and you can never retreat and let your hair down socially and feel comfortable in your own skin. Like you always feel like they don't know what that feels like as a 14, 15, 16-year-old. However, in 10 years or so, give or take a few, there will no longer ever be a generation of parents who do not know what it's like to be a teenager on social media. Because like I'm 32, I grew up with MySpace, and it wasn't when I was in middle school, and Facebook when I was in high school, and all the so I was like on the front lines of social media as a kid. Like all of those social media platforms were marketed to me. Like I was the target audience as these things were being created. So I know what it's like to be a teenager with social media. I do. A little bit. I didn't have it in my pocket quite as much because smartphones weren't as big of a thing when I was in high school. The iPhone came out when I was a junior, but I do know the kind of after school social pressure that came with social media as recent, as high school. So when my daughter, who's almost 3, becomes turns 13 and could theoretically log on to these apps if the age gate is where it is today. And let's pretend for a second that I would let her on, fat chance, but let's say everything's the same and I would let her on Instagram when she's 13. I would at least know from experience what it's like to be a teenager with social media and the pressure that comes with that. Like I remember, obviously I know it because I study it right now, but like I would be able to refer back to my learned experience. But like a parent of a 13-year-old today has no conception of what it's like to be a 13-year-old with Instagram. They have no category for that. And so they feel like they're like, that's why I talk to parents today. They're like, I don't know how to parent this. Like, I don't know what this feels like. I don't know how, like, they don't count that cost of what it means to not have it because they never had to experience that. And so my hope is, the reason I am a little bit optimistic that it's not just going to keep getting worse forever, but that we may get to a point where it starts to get a little bit better, is in a decade, give or take a few years, we will have an entire crop of parents who suffered through social media as an adolescent, who can kind of maybe empathize with their teenagers who will likely be going through something similar, albeit probably on 3 or 4 different apps than the ones we're talking about today. And so that's why I am a little bit optimistic, is that, especially with regard to teenagers, that we're dealing with right now a generation of young people whose parents cannot understand what they're experiencing, kind of. And in a decade or so, that problem may be remedied to some extent.
To kind of put that into perspective for generational names, typically the parents of a particular generation are 2 generations ahead. Okay, so I'm an Xer. My kids are Zs. You're a millennial. My guess would be your parents for baby boomers, just to guess on it and stuff. So as a millennial, your kids are going to be as by and large are going to be Gen Alpha, that new generation coming along, which are about 10 years old now, depending on what day you define that kind of stuff. And if you'd like to download an ebook, I'll have one out pretty quickly on the generational. I was working on that, but that does. So we're talking about Gen Alpha and the next group, which will probably be called betas, because we're getting very uncreative on our names now. But as we go forward, so the alphas and the betas will be the ones who have parents who are millennials, older Gen Zers by and large, that understand this concept. I hadn't thought about that, Chris. That's pretty brilliant, actually.
Yeah, I think that's a major factor. I'm not saying it's going to solve everything.
No, yeah,
but I
I
think
agree.
social media literacy is, I think, only going to improve. And so my hope is that helps young people moving forward.
That I think you're right. I think you're completely right on that. I mean, social media is across all generations. I mean, I think we've all seen the commercial before, where the couple says they've got ants, and one of the ants is there. They say, "Hey, did you get my Facebook friend request?" You could tell the guy didn't want to do it. So it's generational now, but it is really concentrated on it. I do like what you said too about the fact we're going to be dealing with 2 or 3 apps that we don't have now. I did a roundtable last year when we completed our series. I did a roundtable with some Gen Zers and said, "Hey, tell me," and we just talked about it. And they started mentioning apps that I had never even heard of. I was like, where did those come from? You guys are connecting with those? Oh, yeah, because my friends have it, and I was getting requested from other folks. That peer pressure bullying of it, and those apps still are not mainstream or widespread. So it's like it is you said it right. It's a complicated issue that we just have to be patient and navigate on this, and fill our toolbox with resources like your upcoming book that can help them understand this. So if a parent was to get your book, what are they going to glean from it? What are going to be some of the ways it's going to help them?
Yeah, I think the book is broken down into 13 different topics that, you might find 3 of the chapters far more helpful than the other 10, just depending on the nature of your teenager, your stage and where you're at. And but then in 3 years, when your other kid comes up, maybe 3 of the other chapters will be helpful. And so the chapters are arranged kind of topically. And then within each chapter, it's broken down. It's like, hey, here's how social media warps our understanding of this topic. Here's some of what scripture says about that. Here's where some common wisdom says about that. And here's how I think practically you can push back against how social media negatively affects, our discernment, our ability to discern what's right and wrong, or true or untrue. Here's some ways that, social media has made it feel like entertainment is the most important thing. How entertained am I is like, a very common way we make decisions about what apps to spend time on or things like that. And so, how can we practically push back against the idea that being entertained at all times is the most important thing? And so my hope is that based on the topic, certain chapters may be more helpful than others for parents, but that you'll find a general, again, like I believe strongly that a lot of parents maybe don't understand why their teen finds social media so attractive. Maybe this is a parent who's not addicted to social media and they just can't get why social media is such a big deal for their teenager. There are plenty of parents like that out there too. And my hope is that this is not a book about teenagers, let me be clear, but I do think obviously because they're the power users of social media, it's particularly applicable to them and parents for teenagers. But my hope is that a parent of a teenager could be like, oh, that's why my kid finds TikTok so interesting, or finds just social media in general so enthralling. Now here's how I could graciously and lovingly kind of push back and loosen the grip of social media around this particular topic or theme in my child's life. I have an entire chapter on how social media shapes our understanding of sex and sexuality, which is a huge cultural issue right now and on all kinds of fronts. And so, yeah, I really hope to educate leaders and parents and then equip them with some really practical steps of, hey, here's how you can loosen the grip of social media on the people that you love, and maybe try to disciple them and lead them yourself in this area.
Yeah, it has changed all those aspects of life that you talk about. Living peacefully with one another. We're arguing more now. It seems like using platforms as a way to do this, and buying into theories that come left and right all over the place. Um, I have a good friend who wrote a book where he talks about the fact in that book that Facebook and other things have diminished the word friend, that it does not mean what it did just decades ago or just 10 years ago, and that it does not mean that anymore. And as such, we don't know how to form relationships with this. The things
Totally.
that we try to teach coaches and people who are working with youth, that to focus on when they're working with youth, there are three major areas, and I think you could say that social media affects all of it. One is their self-image. That's a big deal. Second is relationship building, and the third one is finding purpose and the ability to do dreams. And you cover all those in this book as it's going through. So I love that it's a resource that can be used effectively in there
Great.
as it's going forward on that. And to our audience, for those who may not be people of faith and they're not coming through this book is still very applicable to any aspect. So please don't reject it because we're coming, because we are, and we talk about that, but it's just a part of it's our characters, who we are. So we're going to talk about it.
Yeah.
If you've been listening to the show, you should know that. So you should be listening to it as well.
Yeah, my hope is that you might find some of the examples are like, oh, this is for a pastor or whatever. But my hope is that it would be still helpful. Just pick the meat off and spit out the bones. And I read plenty of books that way from people who I don't necessarily agree with on various things. And my hope is, that it would be helpful for folks who may not even share my same foundational belief. And I would hope that it would still be helpful and practical in some respect, for sure.
And the system has been set up, and I use the word system, has been set up such that we really cannot communicate in the fields that we are unless we're using social media. So folks might look at us and say, hey, you guys are hypocrites. You're talking about the negativity of how it's changing us, it's doing this stuff, but you're promoting your products and reaching out to people on social media. So that's why I love what you're saying, is we got to learn to live in the culture that's around us.
Yeah, I am. A lot of folks ask this question, especially with regard to my last book, like, were you anti-social media? I'm like, no, I think social media can be used for great good. I love it. I enjoy so many aspects of it. I am an avid TikToker myself. I don't create content. I just like to scroll. And I try very hard to not scroll too much on it. But I like Vine was my favorite social media platform ever. So I think it really embodies that spirit a lot, because it's a very similar platform. And but like, I think what we have to remember is social media is not neutral. It's not a blank slate. It is bent toward brokenness. It's bent toward biases. Like, there are biases baked into the algorithms. And I don't, like, a lot of people will get very passionate about political biases. I don't even mean just that. I just mean all kinds of slants. Like, these things are slanted. Slanted toward keeping us on them. They're very interested in keeping us on them for as long as possible. And so
exactly,
if we just let ourselves be carried along, the way I've often described it is, we can't just let social media happen to us. We have to own our relationship with social media. And so that's why I don't think it's all bad. I don't think it's like you should never use it. I think there's plenty of good. I maintain a lot of friendships with people across the country and the world on social media. I think there's tremendously helpful uses, but I think that if we just kind of let it happen to us and we don't go into it with a plan, with some maybe accountability of somebody who can say, hey, I've seen you posting on Facebook like every 3 hours. You got to back it off, bro. Like, we got to have people who can come alongside us. We have to have some safeguards in place for whether it's, keeping us from viewing certain content or spending too much time. That's like, iPhones are great. I'm sure Android have it too, where you can set time limits for apps. Like, we should be using every means available to have a healthy relationship with social media. And my advocacy is not never use it so much as just use it with some thought. And so do everything you can to use it thoughtfully and intentionally, rather than just let it happen to you.
And you talk about iPhones and Androids having those limits or reminders to get off of it on certain things. I saw just today where TikTok is introducing a feature where under a certain age, they'll limit usage Now, this is a voluntarily opt-in function, so parents are going to have to be proactive on it if they're letting them use it. But it was limiting, and I don't remember the specifics of it. It was just a passing review, but it made me think of our conversation today of limiting. Have you seen that where they're having a
Yeah.
feature where I think it'll limit them an hour or 2 hours or 2 hours? I can't
Yeah,
even
I
imagine
just
that.
saw a couple I saw a couple headlines about it. I haven't read the articles yet. I've been kind of busy today, but yeah, I think that's cool, and I think we want more of that. I think what we need to be sure of is that this isn't just kind of lip service, right? Like we need to,
Right.
because platforms have done this in the past where they say we're going to enable this thing, but then they figure out some way to kind of make it not work how it should or whatever. And so I think we should always all of these platforms, I hate to lump them all together, but it is true of all of them as far as I can think. We should always welcome new features like this with open arms, with the understanding that they may not be quite as they seem. And so we should always be a bit guarded and not these platforms have routinely demonstrated that they shouldn't be totally trusted. And so we should always walk in, examine these features, say, okay, that's a nice new feature. But let's figure out, is there another side to this? Is there, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not saying to always be we should be vigilant. We should be vigilant is the best way I would describe it. Not necessarily always looking for the negative, but we should be aware that there's often more that meets the eye with some of these things, and that we should just be vigilant about it.
Our conversation today has made me think of how many parallels there is between this and the battles that we had just 2 decades ago with tobacco. As we brought big tobacco in front, and we were shocked to find out that they put addictive qualities in their product because they wanted people to do this. It's the same with social media companies. They have put intentionally addictive qualities in there because time on their platform means more money to them. And I don't think there's anything inherently evil about that concept. It's the naivety of people not understanding that's what they're there for. They're not there for your benefit. They're there at the end of the day to make a dollar. They make a dollar the longer you stay on. And
That's
just
right.
understanding that.
That's right. We
So
have to realize that our values and social media platforms' values often don't align.
So, how can our audience grab a hold of this book, get in touch with you, learn more about what's going on? How can they do this?
Sure. So my newsletter is at TermsOfService.social. You can find my twice weekly newsletter there. You can find the book, The Wolf in Their Pockets, probably wherever you get books. Amazon's the most common place. So if you want to get it there, totally great. The publisher's website, moodypublishers.org, will have the book available, probably at a little bit of a discount compared to Amazon, though you'll probably have to pay for shipping. I think there are benefits if you were to order in bulk there versus Amazon. So that's something to consider if you're getting it for a church or a group of parents or something. But yeah, Amazon's fine. Wherever you want to buy books, you should be able to find it. And worst case scenario, just reach out to me and I'm sure I can get you one from my little stash that I have. But yeah, that's the best place to find me.
Well, listen, so I want to tell you guys, you really need to get on his newsletter. And I'm not just saying this because you're the guest, but you do a very, very good job of arranging that newsletter in an engaging manner that keeps it yourself on there and makes you want to click the links to the deeper articles. And I find myself looking forward to getting those and diving into those. As I'm sitting there, my wife gets kind of annoyed to the fact that I'm like, hey, have you heard about this? And going over to this, she was like, what, have you got that terms thing up again? I was like, yeah, it's going over here. And I'm flipping
That's
through
funny.
trying to get to the answer to the trivia question at the bottom. Like, hey, what's the answer to that trivia question?
Yeah, I've heard that people like that little feature. This is a fun little trivia question I added for. It's not even related for anyone listening. It's not even related to social media. It's just usually like I think of some random topic and Google up some trivia on it. But yeah, I apologize to your wife for being that guy. But I'm glad you find it helpful. It's always
I do. I
always
really
nice
do
to
appreciate
hear.
it.
Yeah.
All right, before we get off, and I thank everybody for this, and they tell me how to get on this. I am a huge, massive baseball fan, so I have been eyeing your picture and your stadium seats back there. What's your team?
I'm a Chicago Cubs fan.
I thought as much. As
Yes.
well.
Yeah, so these seats in our video are straight from Wrigley Field, and that is Wrigley Field up
Really,
there in the picture. And then this, if you can see over over this shoulder
the
over
44.
here, yeah, that's an Anthony Rizzo jersey. So from back when he was with the Cubs over there. So yeah.
Oh, and there's some
Yep, big
tickets up
Cub.
there on the top shelf. That's cool.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a fun little story. I'll tell it quickly. The first time I ever sat in the bleachers at Wrigley Field, Labor Day 2012, I caught a home run ball from
Ooh.
Alfonso Soriano when he was playing for the Cubs. He had a home run, and it hit the dude's hands in front. I didn't catch it like out of midair. That would have been cool. But it hit the guy's hands in front of me, basically like at my feet. And then it rolled right at my feet, and I grabbed it. So yeah, that's, you can see in the shadow box up there. There's a baseball, and then the tickets and such from the game. And then this, I'm trying to figure out where I'm pointing. This is first base from a Cubs game that I got after a game
Oh,
one time.
I didn't even realize
Um,
that was the first base up
yeah,
there. Okay.
yep, that's a first base. So I love having some Cubs memorabilia around. There's some others around the room that you can't see, but yeah, big
I
Cubs
should have
fan,
worn.
and we're go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was just gonna say
I was
I
gonna.
used to coach a youth team that was the Cubs, and so I have all this
Oh, fun.
Cubs paraphernalia that I instead of wearing their dumb little jerseys and stuff that they had, I actually bought a bunch of Cubs stuff to wear as going
Nice.
forward, and the big C hat on that.
Cool.
Going forward. So I should have, if I'd known that, I would have worn that just to
Yeah.
be in synergy, is to have some synergy.
Right.
going forward.
Right. That's
Even
great.
though I am a Braves guy, so.
Hey, Braves are great, and I loved. I'm sad he's not there with you anymore. I love Freddie Freeman, and now we have Dansby, so we have a bit of a connection. And but yeah, so that's cool.
Well, audience, thank you for sticking with us. Listen, someone that you know needs to hear this episode. So please like and share and comment on this. It helps with our algorithms as we talk more about social media. We want to make sure it gets out. Share this with your people on social media so they can come here and learn some about social media. What a circle I just made of that connection there going forward. Chris, thank you again for your time. I love our conversations. It's something I'm really passionate about how it's working with youth and how it's affecting them, and how we can equip parents and those who lead youth effectively to help them through this, to help them manage this, as we do see such a severe case of their mental health rising. So thank you again for your time today.
Sure, glad to help, and I hope people are helped by it. And have a great time. I think you're launching a book here pretty soon, so have a great time with that.
Well, thank you. That's a little hint to the group. We are launching a book. It'll be a month after this podcast is about the time that it'll be out as well, and we'll share some more information on that as well. So thank you for plugging that as well.
Sure.
On my show.
Yeah,
All right.
Of course.
Thank you again, and thank you, audience, and we'll see you again soon on the Gen Z Show.